and welcome back to a special episode of 123 All Ears on Me. I'm your host, Dr. Kailina Mills. We're dropping into your podcast feeds with this special episode because we need all of you, educators, families, business owners, legislators, and community members, to help prevent major cuts to childcare funding from being passed in Maine's next biennial budget. Governor Mills's office has proposed several significant cuts that would further destabilize the childcare and early education fields by driving educators and childcare workers out of the industry, which would ultimately make it harder for children and families to access and afford the care that they need. I'm joined today by MaineAEYC's co-executive director, Heather Marden, who is here to talk us through what the proposed cuts are, how those cuts would impact people in Maine, and what we can do to advocate for the children, families, and childcare educators in our state. All right, welcome. Hi, Heather. How are you?
I'm good, Kailina. It's good to be with you.
Yeah, thanks for coming and for doing all the advocacy stuff that you're working on right now. I'm excited to hear about it.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's been a busy start to the legislative session so far.
Absolutely. Can you explain for those who are listening who might not know what we've been advocating on, what is happening, what is going on this legislative season for childcare?
Absolutely. So usually in my line of work for MaineAEYC, as we anticipate a legislative session, we look at current policies that don't exist, and start to try to think about where priorities could be, working with legislators and, crafting bills to either fix current policy or create new policy where we see spaces. Also coming into each legislative session, the governor puts out, depending on where you are in the session, either a biennial budget or supplemental budget. In this session, there's both, but the biennial budget is really the big Maine state budget that is proposed for over 2 year period of Maine's fiscal years, and where spending goes in the state. So, while we were preparing for working with legislators and priority bills this session, the biennial budget came out, and actually, what we saw in there were proposed significant cuts of around $21 million annually, so almost $42 million in the whole 2 year budget, to childcare and Head Start initiatives. So that is what we have pivoted on greatly. So we still have priority legislation to improve and enhance systems in, but right now we're really focused on getting the message out about this budget, because no additional positive bills can stand up on the back of this negative proposal within the budget.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, what are the cuts that Governor Mills has proposed in the next budget?
Yeah. So again, since we're talking about a 2 year budget, I'll actually frame it within a year. I think that's easier to understand. So per year, the cuts proposed are around 15 million annually to the Child Care Educator Salary Supplement Awards. Those are the awards that go out monthly in folks' wages each month who are direct care educators in licensed childcare programs. A second cut that's being proposed is to completely eliminate the Child Care Employment Award through the Child Care Affordability Program. So that's the award that actually just began this past July. Funds were expended within 4 months. Those are helping professionals working in licensed childcare programs to afford their own childcare. So 2.5 million cut to that actually completely eliminates this program. So those on the program would lose the subsidy support they're receiving now, and all those on the wait list will just never be able to receive that, unfortunately. And then the third cut is state investments to Head Start. And so with messaging that's come out around the budget, I think it's important for folks to know, primarily Head Starts are funded through federal dollars. However, Maine, in recognition that Head Start is a really valuable program, particularly for our lowest income families, has done the great job of publicly investing state dollars into Head Start so that more kiddos have access. That proposed cut annually is $3.6 million in state funds. So again, altogether, those three cuts would be a savings to Maine around 21 million a year. However, when we think about return on investment for early care and education, it would be a much greater loss to Maine's economy when we think about potential losses of teachers and workforce and spots for children.
Yeah, that's a lot of cuts in a really vital field, right? We did a lot of advocacy to get those things just 2 years ago. So, we've already kind of proven that it's necessary and the legislature agreed. So to have them cut so quickly would be devastating for a lot of people. I'm going to talk with some folks from Head Start in an upcoming episode about the Head Start cuts more specifically, but I'm hoping you and I can unpack those other two programs that
Absolutely.
have cuts proposed.
Yep.
So why don't we dig into the salary supplement program first? That was the first one you mentioned. And the cuts proposed are $15 million a year. And right now the funding level is $30 million a year, right?
Yes. Yep. Annually. Yep.
Okay, so they're proposing to have the salary supplement program. So tell me, what is the salary supplement program in case someone doesn't know? And then tell me about how those cuts are going to negatively impact educators, children, families, the economy, all of those pieces.
Absolutely. So this salary supplement program actually began initially before it was even titled in the pandemic, as Maine was receiving ARPA funds to support childcare infrastructure, especially for essential workers, in the recognition that one, this field has been overburdened with low wages for decades. And two, particularly in the pandemic, what type of incentives would keep people in the field as we saw massive folks leaving the field in early care and education. It was a high-risk field during COVID, especially when we think about kids and germs. And it's essential work. I think what we really saw on an economic level is, whoa, without childcare, what are our doctors doing, our nurses, our firefighters, our folks working at the grocery stores? Really that without childcare, all these other industries were in major stress on what to do. So the governor, seeing that and through ARPA funds, did work and the Department of Health and Human Services to use some of that funds to bolster the wages of folks working in licensed childcare programs at the time. In the meantime, we actually had been working on legislation prior to the pandemic to start this type of program. So it was this interesting intersection of some federal funds coming in and this kind of already being tried. Well, we had legislation that had been held over because of the pandemic, trying to put a program like this in place. So there was kind of an opportunity, right? An influx of some federal funds. While we were also asking for some state funds to start to address the low wages in the childcare sector. So what happened is Governor Mills and the sponsor of our legislation, Speaker Ryan Fecteau, House Speaker at the time, and again, current House Speaker now, so it's been great to see this full circle, actually did end up working together to dedicate state funding to keep these monthly supplements going. With that, and with new legislation that came as a result of that, knowing that state funds would have to be invested because the ARPA funds would be expended at a certain time. And so they invested 15 million annually into this program to continue it, with language in the law that would also turn the monthly salary supplement into a tiered system, which means we do recognize that folks work in licensed childcare have differing levels of experience, differing levels of credentials and education and training. So really honoring and recognizing that. And that was something the field wanted. So there were listening sessions with the field at the time to ask them, how do you want that structured? And that was overwhelmingly favored by the field to make this supplement a tiered supplement and just not a flat supplement that everyone receives the same amount.
Well, thank you for explaining that. So what I'm hearing is childcare, as we say often, is the workforce behind the workforce, right?
Absolutely.
Businesses cannot operate without the childcare industry. Every other part of the economy relies on that foundation in order for workers to get to work.
Absolutely. And I think one thing to add there, Kailina, is as we see a lot of advancements in AI and technology, this is not a field that is going to be run by AI, or I hope it never is. I don't want to be in a world where we are using AI to help care and watch children, that we always have that human relationship centered. So when we're thinking about this in an evolution of long-term sustainability and wages and needing physical humans to do the work, we really have to think about what's at the crux of that, and that is supporting the folks who are in these jobs day in and day out. So I think that's always an important thing to think when we're talking not only the short term saving we're trying to do with funds, but also long term investments in how we continue to grow resources for the professionals.
Right, because childcare is one of the lowest paid fields across the country and in Maine. It's one of the lowest wage industries, right?
Yeah, across the United States, actually, there was an improvement. Silver lining on this. Post-pandemic, the reports coming out from the National Treasury were that childcare educators were paid in the bottom 2% of the whole labor market. So 98% of professions were making more than childcare educators. We've moved up to the bottom 3%. So now only 97 professions are making more. So, wow, great movement. But when we still think about, in the bottom 3% of all other sectors of our labor industry across the United States. This is pretty sad. And when we even look where childcare is classified, right, where we are often listed in a list in our labor departments, alongside dog walkers, locker room attendants, ushers at theaters. That's the kind of occupational line we sit in. And certainly when we think of the work that we do in comparison with other professionals who work hands-on with humans and have the safety and care of humans as their primary responsibility, we are nowhere in comparison to those other industries.
Yeah, we want highly qualified professionals educating and caring for children, right? They play a vital role in shaping the future lives of each of those children, as well as, society more broadly.
Yeah.
Treating it like it's an entry-level job, like you don't need any qualifications, and can just make minimum wage, really harms children, harms families. And then those childcare workers burn out really fast and move on to other higher paying jobs if they have those qualifications.
Absolutely. And what it really does is it just undermines the, research we have to show how vital these first 5 years in particularly are in a child's overall developmental and, development and growth. And the fact that we think of this as entry level work where folks may not need a certain understanding of child development, is really, again, just going against the decades of research we know now. We literally can watch and look inside child's brains and see how they develop. That's been on Time magazine cover many times about the types of technology we have to actually watch child development in real time. So we kind of can easily, through these research and studies, get past this identification of this field as a babysitting field and flip that script to that we can really do tremendous work for children and their lifelong health and success if we really invest in professionals who understand their development in these, first 5 years in particularly and bridge that to their, schooling that they will go on to after.
Totally. So we want qualified professionals, but it's a low wage industry. So the state created this program to supplement some of the wages, which has been enormously popular from my understanding. I mean, I personally, as you know, I worked at MaineAEYC, and
Yeah.
when supplements doubled, someone with a doctorate in early childhood education, was able to afford to go back to the field and become the director of a program, right? So I couldn't afford to work in childcare, even though I'm a highly qualified, passionate person. And then I was. So can you say more about how the program has worked and if it's been successful so far in like the 1 year or so that it's been doubled?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's always in the back of my head. Like, I'll be done advocating when I can advocate myself back into a classroom, right? because it's a sustainable career that can keep highly qualified folks in there. Yeah, so can you just repeat that second part of the question? I got lost in my thought.
Absolutely. My understanding is that the program has been successful. It's been the funding was doubled to $30 million, and since then the program has been successful, and that's only been just over a year that increased funding has been available. So say more about the success of the program and how
Success.
it's helped people.
Yeah, so the funds were doubled, which means we were able to bring the tiers, at the lowest up over $200. The highest at that time was up over $600. And what we saw from the start and implementation of this program and the data we were keeping, because it is a mandatory program, meaning if you are a childcare program licensed, you have to offer this to your employees. So we're getting a little good data now about actually how many educators we have across the state because this program's now telling us who's getting, how many folks are getting this supplement. At the very start of the program, we were at about 6,200 educators. And then probably 6 to 8 months in, we were up to 6,800. I tend to kind of take that 6,800 number because it takes time for everyone to get into the system and apply, as kind of the starting mark, giving some leeway of folks in the program being implemented. So once we had 6,800 educators enrolled in this across the state, from that implementation to now, we are up to 7,700 educators. That's an 11% growth in this field. So 900 educators, 900 physical people coming into this since this supplement ward has been implemented in this form and in this tiered system. So I think that's a pretty good success story of data in this, identifying what was one of the major problems post-pandemic. Folks couldn't get teachers in to fill their current needs. So we had centers open that had classrooms closed, just nobody in that space because they couldn't get the teachers, right? That was kind of the number one thing we were hearing. Family childcare providers who maybe typically had a second educator or a third educator supporting them so they could have breaks throughout the week or do planning time or, have additional children in their home, could not find that person to bring in. So we had done a survey during that time to find out, okay, based on your current enrollment, license capacity, how many educators are you needing right now to fill your current idealized enrollment? And what we saw through that survey is around the state, we had about an 1,100 teacher gap across the state to just fill current programs, not even to expand. So when we think about 900 teachers have now come into this workforce, we're kind of getting close to closing that gap that and I'm hearing, and maybe you are too, anecdotally, and maybe you're seeing this in your own program, the turnover is not as high as it was a year ago. And folks are getting more applications or more qualified applications now. They're keeping folks more. And again, this is anecdotally. We'd have to conduct some additional, more on paper research. But I talked to one program a couple weeks ago, and this is the first 4 month period stretch they've had without a staff leaving and all their classrooms being open. So to me, that's pretty telling because that means kids are getting consistency. Parents are getting consistency. The program is getting consistency and not continually hemorrhaging dollars to train new staff and put out ads, right? That's a lot of money when you're constantly hiring people. So when you think about sustaining people over the long run and these wage supplements helping in that sustainability, you're saving childcare programs money on their overhead costs, again, which is always better for the business model of childcare because a lot of them are operating in 1-2% business margins. Any dollar that goes out the door is usually at the cost of something that could help children and families and staff in the long run.
And any increase in expenses could be passed on to families, right, who are already struggling to afford childcare and groceries and their bills, right? And so if childcare centers have to increase rates to pay these costs all the time, that impacts families negatively too. And children are getting less consistent, less high quality care if you're constantly getting entry level people in and out and in and out.
Exactly, and I think at the end of the day, when we think of, and I think that's the misconception out in the public sometimes, right? Because this is a business. So why wouldn't folks look at this as a business model and say, well, why are you not making profits? Well, when we think about the product, and in this case, the product is children, because that's the service being provided is for children. And when you want to make enhancements on that to make better profits, you raise the cost, just like anything would in the grocery store. And so, we're seeing this with the egg market so volatile right now, right? Something crazy happened, bird flu, and now we're raising the cost of eggs because the businesses at the helm of that need to make their profit. When that happens in childcare, that's on the cost of families, and it's expensive to care for children. We know that the cost of care for children is high because, again, they are children. They need safe, caring environments, and healthy environments. So the business model just doesn't work to keep putting this on the backs of families. And ideally, what's always happened is the teachers have subsidized in their low wages. So teachers for the long period of time have subsidized keeping those costs from being, completely unattainable by being paid low wages, because that payroll is about 65 to 75% of most childcare businesses' business plan and their costs.
We could keep talking forever about
We
this,
totally could.
But basically the gist that I'm hearing is we're the workforce behind the workforce. We get paid bottom tier wages, even though our profession comparatively should be making much higher salaries. And we want that to get qualified people, to have retention of staff so that families and children get consistent care, all those things, right? And so the salary supplement program has been helping to increase retention of childcare workers and supplement their salaries so they can afford to be in the field. I think we've kind of already hinted at it, but the effects of these cuts would be what exactly?
So, if we were going to kind of put pen to paper on this, the average childcare educator, according to the Maine Department of Labor, makes around $16.40 an hour. If we kind of take an average of these tiered wages, what we would see is probably a loss to the average childcare educator of around $2,000 annually, a little over 2,000 annually. So probably per hour, that looks like a $1.15 less. We're probably looking around lowering that average hourly wage to $15.15 roughly. And again, recognizing this is a tiered system, so it's going to hit different people differently. But if we were going to average it out across the field, it would look like a $1.15 reduction in hourly wages or over $2,000 annually in overall wages. So again, could you imagine anyone coming to you in any job you're at and saying, yeah, we're just going to roll you back by a couple grand a year? Every year you're looking to make a little more. Like that's, a reason we have cost of living calculations, and what most businesses try to do is raise those employee wages each year. We're now going to say to the field, let's cut this. So that's the financial hardship on educators. I think there's a much larger picture to be painted here around, again, if I came to you and said, hey, Kailina, I'm just sorry, we're not going to raise your wages this year. We're going to cut these wages. You're probably going to look at me and say, Heather, it's time for me to move on and find another job. This is what we're going to see in this industry. These childcare educators, who again are on average still only making around $16.40 an hour, are not going to stay in this field, which is really, well, it's valuable work and people love the work they do. It's not easy work. It's mentally exhausting day in and day out to teach in early childhood spaces because you always have to be present. You can't, shut down and tune out at any time during the day. You have to be present for those children day in and day out and anticipating and responding to needs.
And there are studies that have been done that have shown that teachers broadly, but especially child care and elementary school teachers, make more decisions per hour than any other job, more than a surgeon, more than like anybody.
Absolutely.
And it's because there are so many micro decisions you have to be present for and making every millisecond, right? So it is
100%.
it is such a draining, hard job, and we love it, but it requires a lot from us for sure.
does. It's why we see the burnout. And I think when you start to weigh in, what does it mean to be an individual making lower income wages, taking on this immense responsibility? And this is the way I felt in the field. I loved it. I loved teaching. There was a passion every day I walked into that classroom with. And no matter how tired I was, I mean, we get when we drag ourselves to this job when we're sick because we fear like not being there for the kids. This is just what we do as individuals. In that sense of the added stress of making low wages on top of bearing this big responsibility day in and day out, that burnout is real. And it's a field that is constantly bombarded with stressors. So if we can take away that monetary stress and we can say, you know what, you can pay your bills working in this field and maybe you can save a little for retirement. I mean, we move again, 11% growth in this field, and we're still only making $16.40 an hour. Like people came for that. When we look at Washington, D.C., which is probably another state who have done something comparable, but they did it at a much larger scale, they raised their childcare educator wages by $14,000 a year for a lead teacher, right? Crazy. We've raised ours on average $2,500 a year. They saw 9% growth in DC. In Maine, we saw an 11% growth for much less. So people are motivated to be here, but we can't keep treating them in the way we have in terms of public investment because of the value they add to society and our economy. And I think that's the disheartening point that we have to keep making over and over. And a lot of people nod their heads, yeah, we agree. But when we put policy in place and then we roll it back and say, just kidding, it's a hard year, I'm sorry. What have we really said to the, and I'm just going to say predominantly women, some men in the workforce, in terms of their value? What message are we sending right now to say, we're going to take some of that back now?
Yeah, absolutely. And what message are we sending to families, right? We're telling people we're working hard. We want to expand access to childcare. So we're investing our dollars here. This is a place you can come and work and have kids. And then just 2 years later, say, just kidding, this was a bad place for you to have kids. Because like you said, 900 more people in the field, right? Depending on what age they're working with, infants, one person can care for 4 infants. And what I do, preschool, my program is a preschool that I run. We're 1 to 8, right? One teacher can be responsible for 8 kids. So if you multiply that 900 growth of workers by 8, for example, that's thousands more kids and have childcare. And that's how many more families are being served and having access to childcare so they can go to work, right?
Every person that comes into this industry and works in a classroom, allows space for children to be there during the day. So when you think of, in your case, 8 children, 8 families having a safe space to drop off their kids while they're going to school, going to work, whatever they're doing during that time. That return on investment is pretty significant. And if I've said to you, hey, Kailina, I'm going to invest X amount in your wages because you deserve professional wages for the job you're doing. And then because of you, 8 families are out there in the labor force doing their jobs or going to school to get to their jobs in the labor force. And that return on investment is the income they get to take home day in and day out to support their families, which is the investment to the company who's hired them to support their product, industry, services, whatever that company is doing. That investment is great. And again, we have economic reports and research to show every dollar we invest in early care and education in those first 5 years, it's anywhere from a $9 to $11 return on that investment. It's just a super smart investment. And I think what we run into sometimes is, we're so busy trying to do the short-term fix and not looking for the long-term solution that we end up in these situations of investing, proposing to take away, investing, proposing to take away, right? We talk about the water bucket with 100 holes in it. Like, let's plug one, but unplug the other. Like, what have we really done? And in the long run, in terms, especially when we think about educators and teachers, And, you as a director know this, you spend resources and money to train someone, to bring them in, to hire them in your classroom. If you keep pouring them out to another labor industry, our investments are just going out the window. What if we just actually invested in this workforce and kept people in here for the long term? I mean, imagine the amount of money we would save, and we wouldn't have to, keep tiring ourselves out year after year in this, in these advocacy pieces to make the same case and have people nod at us year after year. If families could get to work, find childcare, businesses could have employees, not worry about, this classroom closing, that program closing down because they can't sustain the business model, they can't pay the employees. We'd actually have a very solid economy for working families in Maine. And when we're talking about Maine specifically, an aging state where we probably in the next 10 years could anticipate birth rates being lower than deaths, we have to think what will bring families to Maine, what will keep families in Maine, what will make people want to raise young children in here. Childcare has to be central to that conversation. And it just, again, it will never happen through automation and technology. It will always have to be human services and support.
Absolutely. So I think we've painted the picture of why having the childcare employee salary supplement program would be really devastating to childcare teachers, to families, to kids, to businesses, right? That would be a huge loss for so many people. So let's focus also on the other piece that you mentioned was getting cut, which is the Childcare Employment Award. It was going to be completely eliminated. So can you explain more about what that program is and what the cuts would mean for that?
Absolutely. So this Child Care Employment Award came about. There was a program like this starting in Kentucky. They were using ARPA funds in recognition of like, how do we retain our childcare workforce? And then while Kentucky was kind of upwriting that, and I had been on some webinars learning about that, a director of a multi-center childcare program asked to meet with me, and we talked about one of the highlights she raised was that I'm offering free or discounted childcare for any employee who will come work for me because that's a benefit that helps keep people here. And, between the multiple centers, it was around $100,000 a year that this operation was paying out in this benefit. Imagine if childcare educators could have access to a subsidy to afford their own childcare. That's $100,000 this business could invest back into raising their wages, maybe finding another benefit like health insurance or life insurance or retirement that they could support their employees and investing back in their quality. So that was kind of how this came about. And through work that MaineAEYC does with the larger coalition, the Right from the Start coalition, we brought this, after speaking to this director and understanding what a return on investment could be there, as well as having this Kentucky model we could look at to say, well, what is their data showing? And it was showing good retention data. Let's do this. Let's put this in a bill where, it was kind of what I call the kitchen sink bill. We put in their investments for the wage supplement, start the Child Care Employment Award, and invest and increase our investments in the Child Care Affordability Program. So this award, luckily, passed through the legislative process, was put into law. Unfortunately, what we saw was a delay of its implementation by over a year. So the law went into effect. The program did not get implemented and rolled out till this, past July 2024. And really what it does is it allows categorical eligibility for folks, professionals working in the childcare profession. What I really appreciate, because we're using state funds and it didn't have to have the same regulations as federal funds, is now family childcare providers could access it. And sometimes through federal regulations, family childcare businesses are not always included in some of the programming that's offered through federal funds. So this is a way to say, even if you're a family childcare provider and your children are enrolled in childcare in your own program, you could receive support for them because essentially you take a hit on your own children being in care. So this Child Care Employment Award categorical eligibility, any professional working in your building, also recognizing that some programs hire cooks and chefs. And so during the time they need to be there, their child might need to be in care. These teachers are not the only professionals who hold up this industry, right? There's these other areas of professionals that need to be involved in this system as well for these businesses to operate. So you apply through the same application as you would the Child Care Affordability Award, and there's a little box you check that say I work in a licensed childcare program. Your application goes through, and you either already qualify for the normal CCAP program, or if you don't qualify for that, your application gets denied there and sent on to this Child Care Employment Award. Either way, it's 100% coverage of your childcare costs unless you're at a certain level of income, but it was expended within 3 months. Around 400 professionals were able to access it till $2.5 million were expended. And again, we didn't know how much this would cost. We didn't have any data on how many childcare professionals even have kids in that childcare age range. So this was a good data point that not only was $2.5 million not enough, we need a lot more. Data I've gotten is around 400 professionals are still sitting on that wait list. That's probably grown since the last time I've got that data. Again, it's a program that showed it had value for anyone who applied, and you knew the wait time during that implementation. It hit hard and fast. People came in hard and fast with those applications, and everything was delayed even on the approval end because it was so popular. So I think, again, we've showed we have another program here that the investment is worth it because it's being used and even has folks still waiting to use it.
Yeah, and it's enabling childcare workers to stay in the field instead of leaving when they have kids. And I think another thing you highlighted is benefits, right? We didn't really talk about that because we were so focused on just the wages, but not only are childcare workers paid some of the lowest wages in the country, but it's often a no benefit industry. A lot of places don't have healthcare, don't have retirement, don't have vision or dental, or like all of those kind of standard benefits that you would get in a lot of other fields, right? And certainly in education, if you move to K-12, you're getting those benefits. So, I think the idea of creating this benefit that we're at least going to pay for your childcare is a really important piece to keep people in the field.
100%. Because again, if we go back to that wage thing and say, okay, I can make on average $16.40 an hour. And I look at other industries around me, even, working at box stores or something, there's corporate overhead there where they can pool benefits much easier than a childcare program, which is a much smaller business. And so you're looking, at the help ads, want ads, and, you could say, okay, I could go to childcare and work there for this amount of money. And, oh, wait, they have this great program that actually would pay for my 3-year-old to go to. Now I'm probably saving around $9,000 to $11,000 a year on that. Or I go over here to, this store that's paying around the same hourly wage. I probably can get health insurance and some other benefits here, but I'm going to have to pay for my childcare still. So does that outweigh? So, what we see is this was actually a competitive benefit, and it's something unique to the childcare industry that you don't see often with other corporations and other businesses. Not many businesses, I haven't seen any in Maine that pay 100% coverage of childcare as a benefit. I've seen a little bit that will do some stipends along the way, but there is no benefit like this offered in any other industry in Maine for childcare services. So that could be a huge draw for folks when they're going, which job would I take?
Totally. So eliminating this program would probably have similar impacts of cutting the salary supplement. People are going to leave the field and all these ripple effects come forth, right? So eliminating that program would also be really detrimental. So what is next? If you're an educator, if you're a community member, a parent, a business owner, and you have heard this and said, oh my God, I cannot afford to lose anything from the childcare budget, what can you do?
Yeah, so now is really the time to push collective advocacy. We really can't have any representative or a senator in our state government who has not heard from constituents about this issue. Every single person in our state legislature should know about this, know that it's proposed, and know why it's bad. On February 24th, there will be the first public hearing on the budget, and particularly in this pocket of area around proposed cuts to childcare and Head Start. That budget hearing, who sits there is the Appropriations and Financial Affairs Committee, as well as the Health and Human Services Committee. So it's two committees that particularly pay attention to this part of the bill. And so what we are asking is that folks either come join a rally that day at the State House from around 9 to 10:30. You can look through our Facebook or subscribe to our e-newses at www.MaineAEYC.org and sign up for our newsletter so you can stay in touch with those happenings. You can submit written testimony, and again, MaineAEYC has a template to help you do that. We'll even submit the testimony for you. So we're trying to make these actions easy. We want these two committees to hear overwhelmingly from the field why these cuts would be bad. And one thing that's really helpful to think of right now, some of us are going to be coming in the lens and say these wage cuts would be really bad for me. These, the Child Care Employment Award cuts would be really bad for me. The Head Start cuts would be really bad for me. We'd love it if collectively we could all think of how these three things fit together too. So even if the wage supplement's going to impact you the most, if you're willing to put in your testimony and don't cut Head Start and don't cut the Child Care Employment Award, we want them to know that these are a package of cuts in a larger system that, again, when we look at a bucket and all the plugs of water are coming out, we are just hurting the system even if one of these things passes. And I get nervous sometimes when I hear from the field, well, if they have to take one away. No, 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 no. We are not going that route. They cannot take any of these away, and that message needs to be clear. So writing to your local rep or senator, you can always reach out to us at MaineAEYC, and we will help you connect with them, find their contact information. Keeping in touch with people around you too. I think networking is so important in the advocacy piece, getting to know programs in your area if you haven't already, talking collectively about what it means. MaineAEYC is jumping around the state and doing some mini advocacy events at some host programs around the state. So you can, again, follow us and find out where those events are so you can come meet other folks. But just, you got to make it heard about why it's bad. And when I say make it heard, tell your personal story and experience instead of being general. So me, if I was an educator in a classroom, if you're going to take over $2,000 in wages a year away from me, what does that mean for my bills and expenses? Is that the deciding factor that, well, I'm out of this field? They need to hear that, the specific influences that this legislation would have. So sharing your personal story, how this impacts you, how it impacts kids in your program is super helpful because they're going to hear a lot of broad messages. I think at this point, most people know childcare is important. We've driven home that message. I think we're at an education point where folks, are beyond that narrative of, well, someone should be staying home with the kid. That's not everyone's case. And I think for the most part, that's an acceptance in our economy now, is that not often is that the case. So making your personal stories heard, making sure you're engaging with your local legislators. And I think the important thing to know is a budget process is a long process. And we're going to have to pace ourselves. So this hearing date is step number one. So February 24th, step number one, making, testimonies to the Appropriations and Health and Human Services Committee, being in that space on that day if you can. The hearing starts at 10 a.m. And then staying in touch with your representatives along the way and saying, hey, I know you're still working on the budget. Just want to remind you why these cuts would be bad. It's continuing to insert yourself and build relationships. Myriad of other opportunities I could go through, but I'm going to pause there, Kailina, and see if you have a question or add on to that.
No, I think that's all really helpful. I know MaineAEYC also sent out some templates of language that families could use, talk about why losing access to childcare would be deeply harmful for your family, things like that. If you're not an educator and you want to get involved, they still have resources for you that are really helpful. But yeah, I mean, I emailed both of my state reps, my state senator and my state house rep, within the week of these cuts being announced. And I heard back from my state senator saying, this is the first time even hearing of this. So hopefully, it's been several weeks since then. They've heard from more people, but I do think like there is a chance that they haven't heard. So don't think, oh, someone else is going to take care of this. Like send an email, make a phone call.
Absolutely. Yeah, this is such if you've never taken that step in to reach out to a rep or senator, and I think, one thing we try to do is have folks understand these are your neighbors, like folks who sign, go into public service are not people who are typically, career politicians. A lot of them have started in other industries and maybe started on the school board level. Like they just step into public service. They're at the grocery store with you shopping. They're out in your towns day in and day out. They're in your communities. So their job is to listen to you. That's why they're put there. And then bring their district's needs and concerns to the state house when they vote on legislation and policy. So they are there to learn from you. You are the expert in this area. You can assume they know nothing about childcare, nothing about the business model, nothing about your wages, nothing about, Head Start and the support needed there. So it really is our job to continue to be educators outside of our classroom. And that's, I think an important responsibility to take on because people only learn about the important work that happens if we step out of our classrooms and teach it, out in the general public. So teaching legislators about what this looks like, what this means, and I think some framing too, because I think some concerning things I had was when these cuts were put out was the language used around them. And, with the wage supplements, when the budget cuts were proposed, the language around that was saying, returning it to a sustainable level. This is not going back to $200 a month and how it originally started. This still stays as a tiered supplement. So when we're thinking about going back, now we're saying, okay, at tier one, you're making 240. Let's just say they do the easy math and even half that, that's 120. Wow, losing $120 a month? That's insane. So it's, when they say sustainable on the Maine budget side, I would remind them again on the return of investment. What does it mean if you leave your program because you're going to lose wages? And now your classroom has no teacher. And now that classroom has to close down. And let's use what we said before, 8 kids, and 8 kids have no care. Do you think that $120 a month now is worth it? When you think about 8 families trying to find childcare, I
Or
think it
eight
is.
families, who one of them has to now stay home with their kid and can't work.
Yes. I mean,
Um,
to me, again, it's return on, this return on investment type math stuff is so crucial to understand. And when there's matrix of budget cuts, we understand governments have to make hard decisions all the time. But to me, again, I really go back to that return on investment and what this could do economically to Maine.
well, that's kind of all of our time. I have more things I would love to ask you about. So maybe we can do another episode soon where you share with us some of the other childcare bills that are on the horizon for this legislative cycle, because while these cuts were proposed, I know
Yes.
it's not just about stopping the cuts, it's actually also about investing even more. So let's make a plan and we'll come back to do that together.
Absolutely. Yes. We don't want to always just sit on the negative side of this. We always want to look forward to investments. And I think if I could leave on one notation, as folks are reaching out to your local legislators, remind them that a state's budget reflects your values. And if our values are going to sit here, that we are going to cut crucial programming and resources for children and families, then is that the type of value message we want to put out as Mainers? But thank you, Kailina. I appreciate being able to do this and would love to come back.
Yay. Thank you, Heather, for joining me and for sharing all your knowledge. You are the queen of advocacy. So we need you, and we appreciate you broadly as teachers in the state for repping us so well in the State House.
Well, thank you. I could not appreciate the work you and all educators do anymore. I wouldn't be sitting here if I didn't appreciate and value this work and have been born through this work. And again, just can't mention enough how much our collective advocacy will work. If we come together and we get this message across, I think we'll be looking in the spring and saying, we did it. We saved this money. So we have to get the word out. It can't be quiet. It can't be silent. It has to be loud. It has to be constant. So it gets tiring. I understand, but what's going to be more tiring? Losing money from your paycheck at the end of the day, losing valuable resources, watching kids get kicked out of their Head Start programs like that. We have to put the work in now to prevent that down the road.
Absolutely. And the hashtag we're using on social media, if you want to post on Facebook or Instagram or Blue Sky or whatever you use, it's hashtag no cuts to childcare. So please contact your reps, but also spread the word to your broader networks. No cuts to childcare.
Thanks, Kailina.
Thank you everyone for listening to this special episode of 123 All Ears on Me. As mentioned in the episode, a couple additional episodes are going to be coming out over the next few months regarding the legislative process and how you as a child care supporter can help make sure that childcare is prioritized in our state budget. Some of the advocacy opportunities that were mentioned in this episode include coming to rally at the State House on Monday, February 24th. If you come to that, there is the rally portion first, and then you can stay for the hearing on the budget if you want to testify or just support the folks who are testifying against these proposed cuts to childcare funding. But the most accessible actions that you can do are simple and just involve connecting and communicating with the people in your neighborhood. If you're an educator, talk to the families in your program about what these cuts might mean for them. Get them involved in the advocacy process. Everyone, regardless of where you stand in the system, if you're an educator, a family, a community member, a business owner, you can write to your local reps, your local state senator, and your local state house representative and tell them about what these cuts would mean to you and how they would be devastating for you in your context. And you can tell them no cuts to childcare. And spread the message on social media. There is a chance that your neighbors don't know that these cuts have been proposed. Put it on your Instagram, on your Facebook, on your Blue Sky, in your group chat, wherever you are. Make sure to tell people that they are proposing cuts to childcare that could harm Maine in many different ways. Tell them about how they can get involved. Share this podcast episode with them if they want to learn more. But as always, the home base for all of this work is the MaineAEYC website. That's www.MaineAEYC.org. www.MaineAEYC.org. Subscribing to the newsletters and following MaineAEYC on social media is going to be the surest way to keep up with the information that's coming out in real time. MaineAEYC is on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and LinkedIn. You can follow us and connect with us there. Thank you for listening, and we hope to hear your voice this legislative season. This episode of 123 All Ears on Me is sponsored by the Maine Association for the Education of Young Children, also known as MaineAEYC. This episode was recorded, hosted, edited, and produced by me, Dr. Kailina Mills. See you next time.